Good morning and welcome to our third dialogue on Vision 2030. My name is Belinda Chaora, and I'm going to be your facilitator for today. And I've been your facilitator for the last 3 weeks. And today we are going to be talking about stable economy, trade relations, and re-engagement with the world. So we are going to be talking about Zimbabwe's current framing of Vision 2030 in light of her neighbors, in light of the other countries that she trades with, the other countries that she deals with from a political context. And that's the kind of discussion that we're having today. So like I said, my name is Belinda. I'm going to be your facilitator. We've got a number of people that are also going to be doing presentations or stroke discussions today centered around this topic. If you're watching us, you're probably either in our Zoom room or you are watching us on Facebook, on the Civil Institute Facebook page, or on the Heart and Soul Newsday pages. Thank you so much for joining us on whichever platform you are logged on in. We have a number of hashtags that we're working with as we are going online. So the Civil Institute's hashtag is and will be towards an inclusive society. We're also working with hashtag catalyzing Vision 2030 and hashtag ZimVision 2030. So you can use any of those hashtags to communicate with us on social media. So I would like to move straight into today's discussion. It is an interesting one. And like I said, we've got a number of people who are here to discuss this very important topic. Firstly, I would like to get some opening remarks from Dr. Tatenda Machirori. He is the Executive Director of Civil Institute, and he's going to just, in less than 5 minutes, kind of frame today's discussion. What's the whole point of us talking about Zimbabwe's stable economy, about trade relations, and about us re-engaging with the world? Why should we frame this discussion in that context? Tatenda Machirori is, of course, like I said, the Executive Director of Civil Institute, and his research work centers a lot around citizen agency, solidarity, philanthropy, and public policy. So, Dr. Machirori, I'll hand over to you to give us some opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Belinda. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, friends. This is exciting. This is the third webinar we have had. I was talking in the background to some of our partners to say, at the end of the sixth dialogue, you guys won't want us to stop. So I'm excited with the momentum that we're gaining. For us, the issue around Zimbabwe is very simple. Zimbabwe at the moment is facing a complex crisis, a crisis that on the one end is both internal and also external in terms of the factors driving that crisis. And on the one hand, also has a longer pre-colonial history than acknowledged, and also a post-2000, a 21st century dimension to it. There is the governance challenge within the country. There's the isolation issue to deal with the countries that we're dealing with, we trade with, or even our former colonial master. So it's a country that on the one hand is a very serious candidate for help from the international community, but in the same vein is a country that is also isolated from many international circuits, either of trade or of aid, for many reasons, reasons to do with unpaid for debts, reasons to do with the manner in which other policies were implemented in this country, especially around land reform. So given the complexities that we face, we then ask ourselves that if these issues that sort of are holding us back are not resolved, are we on course to achieving Vision 2030? So the discussion we're having today starts off from a premise to say, for us to achieve Vision 2030, we need a stable economy. And one of the ways of achieving a stable economy is to re-establish ties, economic ties, trade relations with everyone in the world, being able to trade freely with all the countries, and also being able to tap into sources of aid from the developed world for different projects that we have to do. We are lagging behind in so many ways, and we need help. So when we are talking about Vision 2030, we remain alert to the international dimension in which sort of where Zimbabwe is a player, but also part a victim of what is going on. So for us today, we've brought in colleagues who we hope can help us unpack what needs to be done on the side of Zimbabwe, and also what the international community can begin to consider if we are truly honest about us achieving Vision 2030, and if we can also be able to find common ground. The issue with Vision 2030 is around consensus building, finding common ground in how we work. I know my time is up, but I'm just excited about this third part of the webinar series, and I'm the fly on the wall. I'm looking forward to sort of the discussions that we'll have today. We are busy writing notes because we're hoping to actually come up with a policy brief that comes from this particular webinar series, and that this will be directed at government on how government can re-engage the international community to achieve Vision 2030. Back to you, Belinda. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Doc. So we're going to move quite quickly today because we really want to have as much discussion as possible and to kind of get the sentiments across, to have like a really robust discussion with a number of people who are going to be in this meeting today. First up, I'm going to ask Tatenda Machirori, who is the client manager for export development at ZimTrade. And as you know, ZimTrade is the office that is in many ways very responsible for how Zimbabwe is trading, who she's trading with, and also just facilitating trade between citizens of Zimbabwe and also those in other countries. So Tatenda, I will invite you to share your screen. Okay, you've already done that. Thank you so much. And Tatenda, you've got 10 minutes. And then after that, we can then go into some quick thoughts.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Belinda. I will try by all means to keep this presentation within 10 minutes, but you know how it is. We tend to want to explain things. So straight into the presentation I'll go. We just want to take a look back at where we've come from and where we are going. Sorry, I don't know if the screen is changing from that end.
It is not. So maybe you can try again, but do feel free to just talk over it. Okay. We can always share your slides later. Oh yeah, it's moving now. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. So we just want to take a look back where we've come from and where we're going. So you find that from around 2009, our exports were around 1.7 billion. And now we've actually grown rapidly to over 100%. To about 4.4 billion is what we're exporting now. But that doesn't take away the amount of imports that we're actually doing now. So you notice there's a bit of a trade deficit there, but you find that that deficit is actually necessary because you find that there's an opportunity within that for us to be able to grow. There is a bit of a difference, but it's an opportunity for us as Zimbabwe to be able to take our economy a step further, especially as we're driving towards this vision of becoming an upper middle class economy. So there are a lot of things that are necessary for us to be able to grow. And also to increase our market reach as well, as you find that over the years, we've basically been exporting to different countries, but lately we've been concentrating most of our exports into one market, which is South Africa. So that's a dynamic that we actually need to change now, because you know how it is, especially now with the COVID pandemic. I think the one thing that we've learned is that we shouldn't rely on one market as our source. So we need to increase our reach and to go into other markets as well. For us as ZimTrade, we have been venturing into other markets, like in the region as well, your Rwanda, your DRC, so that we can also be able to be very active participants, especially with the AFCFTA, which is coming into play now. And we need to be part and parcel of this in order to help our continent to grow and to increase the exports as well. So these are some of the main products that have been exported over the years. There's more focus on others, as you find that most of those have got more value than others, but you know, over the years with the industry, a lot of things have affected the industry, but we hope that we can then be able to balance the scale so that we can also increase exports or production from different sectors as well. So, you know, the Zimbabwean economy is anchored on these four main sectors: manufacturing, agriculture, mining, and energy. And for us to be able to to spring ourselves forward in terms of achieving the vision, we probably need to do activities that are in these sectors. Here, I've just highlighted some of the key products that can be exported from these main sectors. So in your horticulture, you also have blueberries as well that are high value products that can be exported to the EU, UK, all around the world, macadamia, fresh produce, avocados. Then in the processed foods as well, these are products that we're already making here that have markets that are already available outside of the country. You know how it is. We have a lot of Zimbabweans in the diaspora, so we also need to take advantage of those relations that we have. But there's also a ready market that is available for these products as well. So we have diversity in the supermarkets and the retail markets or wholesale markets all around the world. I know I've heard of testimonies of people walking into supermarkets, whether in the UK or anywhere in the EU, and they feel very proud to find a product that is from Zimbabwe. So our products are of very good quality. We just need to be able to share them with the world. So you have your arts and crafts and other manufactured products as well. Our furniture especially is of very good quality, and there is opportunity for us to send those anywhere around the world for that. So we also need to focus on developing some non-traditional markets. These are some of our own products. Some of us, we grow them in our backyards or in our home towns as well. You know how it is. We can produce them, and then we can also value add. One of the goals of the Vision 2030 is that we increase the value of the products that we are exporting. So we're not just exporting the product as we are producing it, we're also adding value. There's also an opportunity there. Besides the value, you're also increasing jobs that we can export as well to other countries. So the focus on value addition is there, and we need to take advantage of that. So this is also an example of tomatoes as well. You know, the agro-food processing sector is one. It's still emerging at the moment, but there is scope to grow this agro-processing sector. So even in the smallest of products, there is scope for processing it further, not just as paste or as spices or as powder or as juices, but there is a wide scope for that. So these are some of the trade agreements as well that we can utilize to be able to export our products. These are the trade agreements that we have with multiple countries that we can utilize for duty-free or quota-free access to be able to send our products. So we just have to register our products and our companies to be registered as well, of course. Then we can then be able to put our products into these markets. Some of these are regional, as you can see. So these are available for us, especially as Zimbabwean producers, to be able to increase the trade relations between us and the other country. We also have the UK ESA, EPA. I'm sure maybe Tom here will talk more about this, especially after the Brexit. We do have a strategy that we're working on for products that we can then be able to send directly to the UK. But this is something that we can also use to increase our trade relations between us and the UK. So what do we do as ZimTrade? As ZimTrade, we provide market intelligence, we conduct market surveys, and we have all this information readily available here in terms of, like, let's say you have a certain product that you want to produce. If you want to know the market requirements in certain markets, you can be able to avail this information, including statistical information, such as the religion of that country, and also what the market size would look like if you were to send your product there, how they would require it, and the small things, even like the language that is spoken there, that will need to be displayed on your product packaging. Export development, we do capacity building activities such as training, we conduct seminars, and also technical interventions for SMEs and enterprises. export promotion, we do outward or inward trade missions, we attend trade fairs, and it's all an initiative to be able to take our local products out there for the world to be able to see them on a global forum. So, you know, now there is the Dubai 2020 that's happening. I hope some of our participants here do have their products on display there, but it's just so that we can have our products on a global forum for the world to be able to see and appreciate what it is that we produce here, our local homegrown products. And then advocacy as well. We assist with issues that might present challenges when exporting for those that export. And then, so hosting of webinars and trainings are one of our activities as well. Individual assistance for registration for those that are keen on registering for trade agreements. If you need assistance, our offices are always open for you. We're developing a strategy for the AFCFTA and also for the UK ESA EPA agreement as well. And then there's also participation at the IATF. I'm hoping also there are participants here that will be attending the IATF to be held in November. But this is also just another initiative to be able to increase the trade within Africa, so that we can also build a value chain within Africa as well. It can be produced in Zimbabwe and then maybe processed in another country like Rwanda, before it's then exported to the rest of the world. We're looking into developing such type of value chains that we can be able to retain more value here in Africa than to export it to China and have it processed there and then return to Zimbabwe for consumption. So some of the other key projects that we are doing now, we have the provincial cluster development, which is in line with the devolution strategy, so that we can build little communities or big communities rather in each province, whereby they will concentrate on production of certain products, hopefully also value add, process and the likes, including packaging as well, and then export. So certain products will be known for production of certain products for export. And then food for export masterclass. This is one of the other projects that we're working on with some other partners, including the Dutch Embassy, whereby we are helping women entrepreneurs to grow their businesses. They are based in the food agro-processing sectors. So it's just, we capacitate with the skills, knowledge, and even taking them to trade fairs and also conducting technical interventions as well, which are on the floor assessments of what they need to do to improve their businesses, and also create better efficiencies within the enterprises. We also have the best model farm, which is almost a structure like the provincial cluster developments, but then we're focusing on farms where we're building to be models for others that can implement in different places. Then we have a youth incubation program, the Eagle's Nest, whereby we're taking all the youth that we have in this country to be able to capacitate them with skills, so they can also run their own enterprises, and in the hope that in the near future, they'll be able to export their products as well. I take it Belinda appearing means my time is up, and I think my presentation is finished, but thank you all for your attention.
And so thank you so much, Tatenda. Now, before you go, Tatenda, I think one key thing that I saw in your presentation was, just a shift from 1992 to 2020 in terms of the countries that we were trading with. So maybe just as a discussion, which countries, I know you've got a slide to show it, but which countries are showing promise in terms of Zimbabwe creating new trading relationships, or even going into old trading relationships? Just looking at the products that you've spoken of, just some of that, kind of nuanced analysis. Which countries would you say are most key there? Because there's like 9 countries in this 2020 pie chart, but which ones would you say are like, the ones that we should focus most of our energy on, and then also be working to create new kinds of relationships with?
Okay, I think for now we can try and focus more on the region. like, you know, especially in line with the AFCFTA strategy as well. So we can try and increase our relations with our other African countries as well. You have your Mozambique, you have your DRC, Rwanda, Zambia. Of course, it's an issue of volumes as well, because we need to be able to supply the required volumes into these countries. But we can also just try with the southern region, then as we can also work our way up north. With Rwanda, we also have access to the EAC community as well. That's where Uganda is, Tanzania as well, that we can also tap into through Rwanda. So that's another strategy that we can utilize locally. But then we also have access to the UAE market now through Dubai, because our products are actually of very, very good quality. And we've had a few buyers that have come through and they've been happy with what they've seen. And they are products that are there. I think it just depends on which products our people can produce. But if we can go maybe even to agriculture, butternut, potatoes, sweet potatoes especially, we can be able to hinge on those for export.
Now, sorry, just another quick question. My mind keeps going back to what do we do about China? So, like, are we? So this is export. So you've compared 1992 and 2020. China appeared in your 1992 export statistics, but in 2020, I'm not seeing, you know, China as a glaring statistic unless it's in the 23% of other. So just explain to me, what are our dynamics with China? Is it more of imports rather than exports? You know, I know there's a lot of, you know, just push from the government to kind of look east. Is that something that we can kind of leverage on, especially for exports? What are your thoughts?
Okay, so for that one, for China, it's just unfortunate. For some of our products, we're actually sending through South Africa and then to China, because you find like our citrus is going out through Durban. Our macadamia as well is going through South Africa, which is some of the high value products that we're exporting here from Zimbabwe. So we are in the process of developing protocols that will allow us to be able to access China directly. But for now, most of the processing, some of the processing is being done in South Africa. So that's something that we're hoping with, if we have a protocol, especially for our products, to be able to export directly from here, we'll be able to then increase our export directly to China.
Okay, all right, yeah. Tatenda, I'm gonna cut us off here. I really want to get insights from Mr. Eddie Cross, who is in the meeting today. Okay. Thank you so much, Tatenda, but we are going to be creating room for a discussion. So Eddie's not a stranger. Welcome to our meeting. He's an economic analyst, and he's done a lot of work with some of the big companies in Zimbabwe's history. So the Cold Storage Commission and, you know, just numerous other companies. He's been a member of parliament as well, so he kind of understands how laws are made, how policies are implemented, but he also works as an advisor across many sectors and to a number of people, including at different stages to the Presidium. So Eddie, I'm going to give you a few minutes, about 10 minutes, and then we're kind of going to go into a discussion. So what would you say, Eddie, in terms of our prospects for re-engagement? What should Zimbabwe be focusing on?
Thanks, Belinda. Good to speak to everybody. I see we've got a fair number of people on the system now. And thanks for the invitation. Re-engagement actually is a critical factor in the attainment of Vision 2030. In my view, the goal of achieving middle income status by 2030 will not be achieved unless we are successful in this particular area. And I think the visit by the rapporteur from the United Nations to look at the impact of sanctions on Zimbabwe this week is a useful step forward. I go back to 2018 when the president was inducted in August, and he made a speech in which he set out his vision for the nation over the next 5 years. And one of the key factors he raised there was the need for Zimbabwe to seriously engage with the international community if this was possible. And I think what we need to recognize at the outset of this discussion is the implications of isolation. If you have a look at the history of development in China, for example, after the death of Mao Zedong and the introduction of Deng Xiaoping as the new leader of China, he committed China to opening up to the rest of the world and to a policy of economic and political pragmatism at home. And this has resulted in China becoming one of the major players internationally and one of the biggest supporters of the policies of free trade internationally. And it's interesting that in recent years, China has in fact been the major proponent of liberalizing global trade. Liberalization of global trade was, of course, a key element in post-Second World War policies by the major nations of the world at that stage. And it has resulted in international trade growing very strongly, consistently over the last 50 years or so. Now, if you're isolated in any way from this global system of trade, you cannot hope to attain the sort of growth figures that you need to bring your people out of poverty and to attain some kind of middle income status. All of that has been achieved in the Far East. In fact, the achievements of the countries of the Far East, what they call the Asian tigers, has been really quite remarkable. So that's the first thing. We need to recognize that isolation from the global system has long-term implications for us. The second point I want to make is the implications of the sanctions regimes which are being applied against us by the United States, Europe, and the United Kingdom. First of all, they've been in place now for nearly 20 years. ZDERA in the USA was promulgated by the US Congress in 2002. And these must be amongst the longest running continuous sanctions on any country anywhere in the world. Even the mandatory UN sanctions against the Rhodesian government, which was imposed in 1967 and ran until 1980, was not of the severity of this particular program. And you've got to ask the question, why? Why have we been picked out for this kind of treatment? One commentator said to me the other day, it's because sanctions are quite a popular policy strategy. You look at what the international community has done to Afghanistan after the collapse of the American efforts to try and introduce a new government there and the emergence of a Taliban-dominated regime. They've imposed sanctions. They've frozen their foreign assets. And it has plunged Afghanistan into a huge economic and political crisis and threatens the instability of the country. And all of that makes it nearly impossible for whatever government is running Afghanistan on whatever basis to actually lift their people out of poverty and to establish some kind of stability where people can have decent lives. So sanctions here, although they were intended to target specific individuals, have very, very wide implications. Our banking system today is virtually completely isolated from the rest of the world. And even making relatively small international payments can involve bureaucratic delays, even detention of the funds overseas. We've had recent experience where major export companies in Zimbabwe have had their funds intercepted internationally by banks acting under instruction from Washington. And, you know, obviously any company that has its export proceeds detained on an arbitrary basis overseas, you know, will have to seriously think about staying in Zimbabwe and continuing to function here. And certainly foreign investors looking at the situation here will see this as a major impediment. The next thing is that the leadership of the United States on this issue has been followed by both the European Union and the United Kingdom. The EU, in fact, has been much more accommodating to Zimbabwe than these other two states. And the EU, in fact, is allowing quite significant liberalization of their restrictive regime, and it remains much more targeted than the other regimes. So what are the stipulated requirements of these foreign governments who are imposing this isolation on us and these sanctions of one kind or another? Well, first of all, they want us to move towards real democratic elections. And I think the one thing that we're not getting enough recognition for is that the 2018 election was in fact reasonably democratic. That was the conclusion of all the foreign observer missions. And I think it was reasonably democratic, and I don't think we've received enough recognition for that. The second is human rights observations. Human rights are throughout the country. And here, relatively minor human right violations. For example, in the 3 years since the 2018 election, we've had about 5 highly publicized abductions of one kind or another. And to me, the impact of these and the significance of these abductions have been blown out of all proportion. And I don't really see why this is happening. Maybe it's because we've got a very active civil society here, but also I think the media plays a significant role here. Then they expect us to observe property rights. And here the great violation of property rights under the Mugabe era was, of course, the nationalization of the assets of commercial farmers. And here again, this new government, has recognized this and have in fact reached agreement with the farmers on compensation and remains committed to paying compensation. Despite that, there's no sign at the moment of any major financial grouping anywhere in the world being prepared to assist us with that problem. And right now, it's beyond our financial capacity to meet. And then they require us to observe our constitution, not just in letter form, but in reality. I was fascinated yesterday to watch Cyril Ramaphosa in South Africa talking to his local government candidates, and he has introduced a sort of a code of conduct for them. And he said in his speech that he keeps a copy of the South African Constitution on his desk all the time. And I think that's the kind of attitude that the international community wants us to observe. They recognize we have a fairly decent constitution. The constitution in South Africa might be one of the most progressive in the world, but they say we violate the constitution in the way in which we administer our country, and we do so seemingly without any serious consequences legally. So I think that requires quite a lot of attention here. We have, since the change of government, modified about 200 acts of parliament to bring them into line with the constitution adopted in 2013. That remains unfinished business. And then finally, there's freedom of speech and association. And I think we've come a great way on that one. Certainly, you look at the diversity of newspaper coverage today, listen to the media although it's pretty much dominated by the state, it is much freer than it was in the past. Freedom of association, I think we have that to some extent. I was dismayed by the violence against Chamisa in Masvingo province last week. And I think that kind of thing we must crack down on very hard. We must have freedom of speech, and it must be recognized as such, and it must be respected by everybody. And then finally, there's the question of the rule of law and the independence of the judiciary. The three pillars of the state: the judiciary, the executive, and parliament. And I think we've got to say that our executive here has always been much too strong, much too dominant. And the influence of the judiciary and the independence of the judiciary remains something which is a little bit distant. But in addition, can we really say that our parliament plays a really significant role in our national affairs? I was a member of parliament for 10 years, and 80% of the time in parliament was a complete waste of time. Our committees were where the real work was done. But really, in reality, can we claim that we've made a real difference? I don't think so. So the Americans tell me that if we want to re-engage with the world, we've got to come to the party. So I think this agenda, this reform agenda, is very much in our court. At the same time, I'm reluctant to acknowledge that we simply reform for the sake of meeting the perceived requirements of the international community. I think Africa is much more complicated than that. I think the demand that we all conform to a specific form of Western democracy is completely unrealistic. But at the same time, I recognize that if we're not given access, if we're not given readmittance to the world community as a nation and respected for who we are, then I think our prospects of attaining middle income status by 2030 are remote. I think I'm reasonably optimistic that we can achieve it, but we've got work to do. Thanks, Belinda.
So I like the kind of broad overview you've given. And in a few minutes, I'm going to ask you to then just do another short deep dive. I think looking at the presentation that Tatenda did, and she highlighted 4 key areas of the economy. Just to then talk about the key things that maybe the government of Zimbabwe could do kind of to rejig the economy from that lens. But I like this overview because here you've kind of talked about sort of the re-engagement sort of reform agenda. So before we kind of dovetail into all of those other things, I would like to invite somebody who is actually on the call today and is representing the United Kingdom. So that is Lord Johnny Oates. I will invite you, Lord Oates, to unmute your mic and turn on your video. I just want to get your comments, kind of from a Westminster perspective. I'm sure Zimbabwe, everybody who's in the room knows that we were colonized by Britain for many years and attained independence in 1980. And since then, the relationship has had ups and downs. But I would like to believe that at the moment that there is some mending that's happening. So I want to get your perspective when you are representing Zimbabwe, because you have direct oversight over Zimbabwe from Westminster. I just want to get your input on the conversation that's happened so far. Just from Tatenda's presentation, what are the key things that Zimbabwe is doing in terms of exporting and obviously trying to rejig its economy? Some of that we're going to discuss later. But when you are hearing about Zimbabwe, when you are thinking about Zimbabwe, what comes to mind? What are the sentiments that you and other lawmakers are having from your end?
Thanks very much, Belinda, and very interesting presentations also from Tatenda and Eddie. I should say, first of all, I do not represent the British government. In fact, I'm an opposition member of the House of Lords in our second chamber in Parliament. But I do chair the all-party parliamentary group on Zimbabwe, and that is made up of parliamentarians, as the title indicates, of all parties across the House of Commons and the House of Lords who have an interest in Zimbabwe. And just by way of background, I taught many years ago in the late 1980s in a school in rural Manicaland, and developed strong ties to that area and have remained in touch with Zimbabwe. My hope and desire, like I'm sure everybody's on this call, is that Zimbabwe can be a prosperous country, a prosperous middle income country in which every citizen is able to reach their full potential. And clearly trade and investment is going to be an important part of that. And also the nature of the sort of goods that Zimbabwe exports. I think Tatenda talked about the importance of the added value in Zimbabwe being produced rather than just exporting commodities, and I think that's a very important point. But I just thought from the UK perspective, I might just give some indication of some of the barriers, I suppose. I mean, first of all, without getting into the whole argument about sanctions or not, the position of the British government is that there are not sanctions on Zimbabwe. There are individual measures on particular politicians or business people, either because of corruption or because of human rights violations. And in addition, there are measures against Zimbabwe defence industries, and there's an arms export ban. That's the position the government, the British government takes, and I think other governments which have imposed measures. But there are no trade sanctions, and any British company is free to trade and invest in Zimbabwe. But I think the absolute key, and Eddie touched on some of the issues, but the absolute key at the heart of this is trust. Because any country that is seeking to trade, seeking international investment, is competing, with every other country, and therefore trust is really, really important in this mix. Zimbabwe, on the face of it, has many advantages. It's got a highly educated population, obviously, a great entrepreneurial spirit. It's got a great track record and tradition in agriculture and some areas of manufacturing and mining, etc. So there's huge potential. But the key items that Eddie touched on, trust that the rule of law will prevail, trust that the judiciary will be independent, trust that there will be some stability in macroeconomic policy, trust that exchange rate policy will be realistic and will reflect the actual value of currencies, and trust in property rights. And unfortunately, without those, investment is hard to come by. But I think the most essential thing for anyone is the feeling that government will keep its word. And I mean, we have had problems in my own country where the government indicated and talked about bringing in an act of parliament which would allow it to breach international law. Luckily, it backed off from that. We're in a dispute at the moment with the European Union about the agreement that we signed with them and the suggestion that we won't keep our word. on that is deeply, deeply damaging. It's deeply damaging to us as a nation politically. It's deeply damaging, in the long term, if that sort of thing goes on, to the idea that people can, that this is a place to invest. So every country has to face these issues. And I think there's quite a lot of work to do to restore that trust. But Britain is very open to it. I and the group that I chair be absolutely delighted for Zimbabwe to be back trading and investing like every other nation, and I hope that will come about. I think a key part of that is being seen absolutely explicitly to abide by the 2013 Constitution, and that's absolutely key to it, and being able to show independence of the judiciary and the rule of law. So those are my perspectives from abroad. I'm sure many people on the call will have their own perspectives about the United Kingdom, and I understand that and respect that. But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for making the time. I know you need to dash. Just to say to the audience, if he logs off, he's not running away. We did ask him specifically to just make time for just a few minutes to get his insights as well. But thank you so much for that. And I will release you. But if we do have any other questions or engagement, we might just send them via email. I'd like now to go straight into Tom. Tom Hill is representing the British Embassy here in Zimbabwe. And after that, we'll then come back to talk, to get some insights from Eddie again. So Tom is the Zimbabwe country director for the UK Department for International Trade. He's based in the British Embassy here in Harare. Sorry, I should have said that's where we are broadcasting from. Tom has worked in Zimbabwe since 2018, and he covers trade and investment, and as well as working on the UK-Zimbabwe Economic Partnership Agreement, which entered into force in 2021, January 2021. So Tom, I will invite you to unmute your microphone and to share your screen. And I think just to kind of dovetail into what Lord Alt has talked about, what Eddie's talked about, what are the key things that you see for Zimbabwe?
Thank you, Belinda, very much. And hello also to everyone on the call, including Eddie, who we speak to regularly, so it's good to hear from you as well. So yes, as Belinda says, I'm Tom Hill. I'm the country director for the Department for International Trade here in Zimbabwe. And I think, first of all, just perhaps addressing some of the comments that have come up previously, I'd just like to sort of make very clear from the beginning that, as the UK government and the British Embassy here in Zimbabwe, we're fully supportive of UK-Zimbabwe trade. And this is something that has remained fairly robust through the past years, despite the impact of COVID-19. And indeed, over the past financial year, so from April 2020 to the end of March 2021, UK-Zimbabwe trade was worth over $246 million. And that's something that we are committed to seeing grow, and we look forward to working with Tatenda and other colleagues in ZimTrade and the government of Zimbabwe to do this. I think, as Lord Oates said, and a number of other people on the call have said, this is something that is eminently achievable given the potential that Zimbabwe has in the country, not just in terms of resources, but abundant human capital. This is a country awash with entrepreneurs, awash with skilled labor, and a huge amount of potential to grow its export capacity. So I've been in Zimbabwe for 3 years now, and I've been lucky enough to see this capability across the country, from agricultural producers in Chirugwi to citrus growers in Beitbridge and colleagues in Hondi Valley as well. And all of these exporters and producers are able to access the UK market through the Economic Partnership Agreement, which entered into force in January this year. The Economic Partnership Agreement, which Zimbabwe is a member of as part of the Eastern and Southern African bloc, ensures that Zimbabwe gets duty-free and quota-free access to the UK market. So this means that your blueberry producers in Marondera and elsewhere, and your Monge 2 producers in Nyanga, they do not have to pay duty to export to the UK market, and this gives them an edge on competitors in other markets. So I think, hopefully, I think this demonstrates the UK's commitment to the trading relationship, and I'd also like to talk a little bit about some of the programs we have to help this grow. I was asked by Silvio to talk a little bit about the impact of Brexit on the UK-Zimbabwe trade. And obviously, you know, the key outcome of Brexit is the UK now has a independent trading relationship, and that will enable us to grow our bilateral trading relationships, including with Zimbabwe. So through the Economic Partnership Agreement, we do support Zimbabwean exporters through the UK Trade Partnership Programme. This is a program that works with a small number of lead farms to support their export capability, helps them work with outgrowers to bring in smallholder farmers to the export supply chain. We also have a program called the Trade Advocacy Fund, and this helps us support the Zimbabwean government in increasing their trade negotiating capability. This is something that will come to the fore in the coming years as we look to further develop the UK Zimbabwe trade agreement, or the UK ESA trade agreement. So how can we make UK-Zimbabwe bilateral trade stronger and higher? Well, first of all, I would like to address some of the comments made earlier, including by Eddie, with regards to sanctions. Lord Oates has addressed some of these, but to restate, UK sanctions are on 5 people in Zimbabwe. They're asset freezes and travel bans. They're imposed because of human rights and corruption, and they do not preclude or prevent UK-Zimbabwe trade. There's huge potential in UK-Zimbabwe trade, and we are very committed to supporting this. Where are the areas that we see potential? Well, obviously, agricultural sector has huge scope for growth. I think this was worth, according to the latest stats, over $3 million in the last 4 quarters. We'd like to see further value addition, and we see a lot of opportunity in the critical mineral sector as well. We should also cover investments as well. As you know, trade goes both ways, and there are a number of UK exporters looking to invest and trade with Zimbabwe. And as Lord Oates also addressed, there are barriers to investment and trade that are hampering further growth in this relationship. These include issues around the currency and currency convertibility, property rights, and rule of law. But this is a private investment decision on the level of risk that investors want to take in Zimbabwe, and we are very supportive of investors that want to work here, and we work with them and engage with governments to help them address these barriers. Finally, to wrap things up, I'm not sure how much time I've got left, but I'd like to say thank you to ZimTrade. We've worked very closely with ZimTrade over the past few years. We actually, I was lucky enough to work with ZimTrade to lead a trade mission to the UK in 2019. And I think this demonstrates how the UK is committed to supporting this trading relationship, how the UK does see potential for Zimbabwe exports in the UK. And we are, of course, looking forward to continuing to work with ZimTrade and other partners in country to grow this relationship in the future. Thank you.
Tom, thank you so much for that presentation. I think the question that comes to mind, really, from Brexit, you know, you've said that, you know, UK Zimbabwe is developing sort of an independent trading relationship now, and you know, you've obviously highlighted some of the key trading missions that you've had and highlighted as well just some of the big broad level minerals, and kind of crops that you would be looking at. But I'm not sure if you would be best placed to kind of answer to say beyond having that kind of engagement in terms of trade, what would your assessment be? I know we've talked about the kind of key things that Zimbabwe would need to do to re-engage, but outside of anything that Eddie's mentioned, what are the kind of baby steps that we can take, going forward in the next few months? I'm hoping as well, we've got a number of policymakers from the Zimbabwean government who are going to watch or get access to this recording. So, just your personal thoughts, what can people do as a next step?
Belinda, thank you. So I think this question can be answered in two parts, and I'm not best placed to answer either part. I think on one part it's the political engagement, where we've been very clear on sort of the steps that Zimbabwe would like to work with Zimbabwe to see them take, and this is an ongoing engagement that we have on a political level. But again, I'd like to sort of highlight that there's nothing stopping investment in Zimbabwe at the moment on that sort of UK side. The thing that is stopping investment or hampering it is investors taking a decision that the risk of investing in Zimbabwe is too high, or is higher than investing in other markets. So this is an ongoing conversation that investors need to have with the likes of ZIDA, Zimbabwe Investment Development Agency, and other partners in government, to listen to investors and respond to what they are looking for in terms of mitigating that risk. And I think currency is the main one. We work a lot with investors in the renewable energy sector. Renewable energy is a very capital intensive sector where there's a lot of initial risk. So mitigating or addressing the issues around currency convertibility is critical. So working with these investors and listening to them to ensure that this is an environment that businesses can comfortably invest in is something that we've been encouraged to see that Doug Manatsi and ZimTrade are listening to businesses and further enacting on what they're asking for would go a long way.
I hear currency coming up quite a lot. Thank you so much, Tom. So Eddie, I'm going to come back to you. Currency, has come up. So you brought it up, and it's come up as well, just as Tom has been talking. I think you mentioned that, the currency is literally like the lifeblood of the machine, that we're calling the economy of Zimbabwe. Now, what are your thoughts around sort of stabilizing Zimbabwe's currency? Or, I know some people have been calling for the US dollar again. What are your thoughts on that? What do you think we should do to kind of stabilize Zimbabwe's currency going forward? Because it seems to be a key thing that will affect, obviously, our relationships with other countries, but then also just the day-to-day running of any household is dependent heavily upon, what the currency status is.
In many ways, that's the central question for today in Zimbabwe. And what I would say is that we've made great progress in the last 3 years. The Transitional Stabilization Program introduced in 2018 was implemented pretty thoroughly. I reckon about 80% of the goals of the TSB were achieved. The major steps forward taken at that time was the decision to reintroduce the Zimbabwe dollar, to eliminate the fiscal deficit, which had really been the reason why the Zimbabwean economy collapsed between 2000 and 2008. And the decision to start trading US dollars at an auction run by the Reserve Bank. And the combination of those elements, although the reduction, the adoption of the Zimbabwe dollar and the reduction in the value of accumulated funds, which we termed as US dollars over the period 27 up to 2017, was very costly in terms of the depreciation of accumulated bank balances and assets. They did in fact restore macroeconomic stability to the country, and I think I would judge that the Treasury today is in a relatively sound state. The problem has been how we manage the foreign currency inflows to the country and how we meet our import demand. And here there are many elements in our trade relationship with the rest of Africa, which is really confusing to say the least. For example, I think that our official imports, which stand today at about $5.6 billion a year, is grossly understated. About 10 days ago, we introduced a new system of border clearances at Byte Bridge, and it's immediately created chaos because the new system is automated. And there's no way in which you can bribe an official at Byte Bridge and get away with not paying your duties or your customs duties. And it's been found that up to 80% of the cross-border trade from South Africa into Zimbabwe was in fact not playing by the rules. And now that the rules cannot be manipulated by anybody on site, in return for a couple of $100 US, we've got this massive queue at Byte Bridge, 14 kilometers long with thousands of trucks in it. And that indicates the extent of the problem. And then there's the issue of what are our real foreign exchange inflows. I saw ZimTrade listed our exports at about 4.6 billion. I think that's about right. Our diaspora remittances, 1.2, other elements, foreign aid and so on, about 800 million, so another couple of billion. So that would explain what we call the official balance of payments surplus, which is running at about $1.5 billion a year at the moment. And that also explains why we have at the moment $3.2 billion in bank accounts. We've never had anything like those reserves. But the problem is those foreign exchange balances are in private bank accounts or in bank accounts controlled by the Treasury, and they're not available for the use of the import industry and import agencies and the wider economy. And so we run the auction on a relatively small pool of foreign exchange. This last week it was about $48 million on Tuesday, whereas we really need about $150 million to meet total domestic demand. So the result is that we have an informal sector which probably in Zimbabwe represents the majority of the economy. The IMF says that we're the most informalized country in the world, and I agree with that. And I think they underestimate. They say 60% of our GDP is informal. I think that's an underestimate. I think it's much bigger than that. And I think that our foreign exchange inflows are in fact much greater than are reflected in our official figures. If you just take gold, for example, the official market for gold is about 20 tons. We know that over 100 tons of gold worth $7 billion is being traded in Zimbabwe. but the bulk of it is being smuggled out of the country. And how do you run in a country where you don't control those fundamental pillars of the economy? So the issue is, how should we be trading our local currency, and how should we be managing our foreign exchange inflows? And personally, I'm one of the people who was behind the introduction of the auction. And I was very pleased with the way it ran in the beginning, but I must say today, the auction has become a problem. The backlog on the auction is 15 weeks for some importers, and this is tying up billions and billions of dollars of local currency, and is also disrupting foreign trade. But also, it's led to a collapse of trust in the auction as a source of foreign exchange for ordinary business. The informal sector has taken off like a rocket this year. I think the values on the informal sector are completely ridiculous. My own personal view is the only way to re-establish order is not to lock up businessmen and prosecute money traders, because that doesn't help at all, just compounds the problem. The problem, what we should be doing here is introducing a more conventional market for foreign exchange. And this would involve, as it does in Zambia, Mozambique, Botswana, and South Africa, all regional states, it involves simply converting all incoming foreign exchange into local currency, using local currency as the sole means of exchange, and operating the market on a willing seller, willing buyer basis. And I think under those circumstances, our exchange rate would be much stronger than it is today. And the banks basically concur with that view because the fundamentals are sound. But we're a long way from there. And I don't find anybody in Zimbabwe who's really behind such a radical change in policy, because too many people are making money out of this chaos. So until we come to grips with that, much the same way as Zambia and Mozambique eventually came to grips with the situation, introduced a conventional exchange rate program. So that in Zambia today, if I pay a bill in Lusaka with my US dollar card from Zimbabwe, that money doesn't get into the account of the hotel in US dollars, it gets into the account in kwacha. And kwacha is the means of exchange. And that's where we've got to go. But we've made substantial progress towards achieving fiscal and monetary stability. What we've now got to do is complete the process of transition and move to a more conventional trading system for foreign exchange. That, I think, will then stabilize the situation and encourage foreign investors to come to Zimbabwe in much greater numbers than they are.
Sure, Eddie, thank you so much. Dr. Marisa, I know you weren't scheduled to speak, but what are your thoughts on what has been shared so far before I move to get insights from Stephen Brian from the Gatham Institute? Doc, I'd just like to invite you to, kind of frame what has been said so far. What are your thoughts?
I think, and it's good. Thank you so much, Belinda, for bringing me back. It's a privilege. But I think we, especially from Eddie, I was just having a private chat with my colleague saying, oh, he's such a wealth of experience. We're struggling to cope or to keep up with the tweets because he's just speaking off the cuff, but he's got all these figures, etc. So it's on the one hand is to say, oh, look, we wish we could just download Eddie and keep some of these policy recommendations on the table. But on a more serious note, I think the issues that have been raised by Lord Oates, by Tom, even by Eddie, to do with building confidence in our government, building confidence in our constitution, that we are a country that is run constitutionally. I think it's very important because at times, what I sense is we are trying to short circuit the process of recovery of reintegration. While there are building blocks that we need, the work, sort of a homework that we have not yet completed, which is number one. But also, given the privilege I've had of working across the continent, some of the challenges that we may think are unique to Zimbabwe, I don't think they are. The waning trust that we have between citizens and office holders, it's a global problem that we have. There's lack of trust and lack of confidence in what is happening. And I'm zeroing in on this trust issue just to sort of build upon Eddie's last point when he was giving the example of Lusaka. I think if you were to go into people's personal vaults in Zimbabwe, people's safe deposit boxes, or even held at the banks. The irony is now people don't go to open an account, but they go and open a safe deposit box at a bank. The amount of foreign currency that is being held outside of the formal system is huge. But I don't think we can wake up tomorrow and say we are compelling everyone with foreign currency to bring it into the banking system. We have to build the trust, because an economy is literally run on trust. I've noticed that the permanent secretary, even in the Ministry of Finance, and even the Reserve Bank governor, have been saying the fundamentals are right. So we don't understand the run on money that is happening. But I think the economy is not literally an issue that is just based on logic alone. It's based on memory and the lack of trust. So I think it's incumbent upon government to be consistent in its policy measures, how it implements policy, so that it does not seem to be changing. So let me give you an example. In last year alone, we had over 300 statutory instruments being passed by government. I would admit that the majority of them had to do with COVID-19 restrictions, but some of them had fundamental implications on the economy. So that creates a sense of uncertainty, a sense of worry that things are changing, and many people devise ways of short-circuiting the system, of staying outside of the formal systems. Because if the figures that we see around our exports, because in terms of exports, I think we do better than Kenya, we do better than Rwanda, but we still have these fundamental challenges in our economy. So I think there's need to really begin to say, how do we invest in trust? I'm not talking about the polarization around politics, etc. How do we trust our institutions again? How do we trust our banks, given that there are certain people who have personally lost money in the banking system? There are institutions that had to fold because of money that was lost. How do we reinvest in that? So I think government is standing on a limb here. It really has to come forward and begin to implement measures in a more consistent manner and be more open and transparent to citizens, especially economic agents. So I think that's number one, and it's very important. And I like also the patterns of trade, because when ZimTrade, when they gave us those figures, the importance of Africa and the Africa Free Trade Continental Initiative that has just been implemented tells us that there's huge potential for us if we have a more Africa focus. Because the challenge that we have at times is we focus mostly on our trade with the developed world, and we miss out on the opportunities that are literally in our backyard. So if you're looking at the low-hanging fruit, I would say SADC is the low-hanging fruit, given what the colleague from ZimTrade kept on saying, our product is good, our product is good. So I think there's so many countries that would yearn for our product, because Zimbabwe has got, despite the challenges it has faced, it still has a solid manufacturing base. So if we're to build upon that, but instead of focusing on trying to recapture international markets, but focus on where Africa is opening up and begin to tap into those markets. Yes, there's that imbalance to say we don't want to depend mostly on South Africa, but let's look at other big markets in Africa, DRC, let's look at Kenya. I saw a lot of our sugar goes to Kenya. I didn't know this, and it's happening. So I think in a nutshell, there's number one, the opportunity amongst traders, the opportunity within business, but there's also the assignment for government to really come through and work the system around building confidence. Thanks, Belinda, for bringing me back.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Marisa. I think right now I'm going to just kind of to get us into our last presenter, who's Dr. Stephen Brian from the Gatham Institute based in the United Kingdom. He is going to give us an analysis, an external analysis. The Gatham Institute does research across many countries on pathways to prosperity, as well as just other policy-related research pieces. I'm going to ask him to talk to us and give us an external analysis. So this is an outsider looking in, somebody who's done research on the subject, but also because they're based in the UK. As it's coming up, I'm going to put up a poll and to ask everybody who is in our Zoom room. Unfortunately, you can't take it if you're on Facebook, but to everybody in the Zoom room, if you could attempt our poll, just to give us some insights about what you are thinking so far, what you have gathered from the topic, what do you know about what's being discussed, and what are the key things that you are gaining from today's discussion. I think just going into that, there are a few comments that have come through in our Zoom room and also on Facebook as well. So the first one is from Shastri Njeru, who says, in re-engagement, politics matters. What is being done to upscale politics to the extent that politics gets its position ahead of economics? So that's Shastri, and that's their thoughts there. And Fanny Dube is saying, would we say that these targeted sanctions are not affecting the whole country? That's a key question there, because I also found myself wondering. I know we've said a number of countries are saying they don't have targeted, they don't have broad level sanctions against the country. But just as Eddie was saying, it's not easy to send money to a number of countries. Even simple things like just getting onto PayPal or accessing Visa cards. A number of banks had a number of issues, in the early years. I know that's changed recently, but a lot of it was around, the policies that are in place. So business is getting some flack, and some impact is seen with, as Eddie did rightly mention that, payments being stopped, reversed, or a lot more questions that need to be answered if you're a Zimbabwean business, rather than if you are doing business from any other sort of SADC country. So that is a key question. I'm not sure who's going to answer it, but I'll just put it out there to everybody who's in the room. But to our event facilitators, please feel free to put up the poll as I invite up Dr. Stephen Grien, like I said, who is from the Legatum Institute. So, Stephen, he has been a permanent feature in these dialogues because Legatum, like I said, has done research across many countries. So we've been weighing heavily on their insights across for Zimbabwe and of course for many other countries as we've been framing the series. And Stephen has a passion for social justice, not just in Africa and Asia, but also within the United Kingdom. He has worked as an advisor to a number of governments, not just in sub-Saharan Africa, but also extensively in the Middle East. His research centers a lot around socioeconomic drivers of prosperity around different parts of the world. So Stephen, I'll invite you to turn on your video and just give us your thoughts, from an outside perspective, sort of looking in. What are the key things that Zimbabwe should be focusing on based on what has been said, and also on the research that you have done? How can Zimbabwe work to improve its economy, its trade relations, and also just kind of focus that re-engagement some more?
Thank you, Belinda, and it's great to be here this morning. And it's been a privilege to hear from Eddie and Lord Oates and Tendai and others. It's been a really fascinating conversation, and I'd like to start by probably reiterating one of the themes that's come through all these conversations around the importance of trust and reputation. And I think there's a realism here that we need to consider, which is that sort of people's perceptions take time to change. So while many of the fundamentals, as Eddie has talked about, have improved over the last few years, the outside world's view is often based on several years ago impressions. So I think it's important to remember that as we go forward, that the outside world will often be a bit behind the times. But for those who are looking to trade, looking to invest, their perceptions are also their reality. So it's an important job for Zeta and for ZimTrade to continue working and pushing hard the good news, as well as understanding what needs to change on the ground to help those perceptions changing. But I think it's worth stepping back a second and asking why are we talking about trade, and why are we so keen on trade? And I think it can be looked at in a number of ways. One is that it provides a source of foreign currency to pay for imports, which is good in and of itself. That's a very instrumental purpose. It also, I think much more valuably, is a source of ideas and technology that help the economy develop. So it's not simply that foreign investment provides X $million as it comes in. It's the tools, it's the techniques, it's the know-how that foreign investment provides is absolutely critical. And simply trading goods provides that conduit. But also, it's a sort of scorekeeping measure, and it's worth recognizing its role here to sort of indicate how successful the economy is, because in effect, what gets exported and the variety of products and the extent to which products get exported is a really good sort of market test on the diversity and the efficiency and the productivity of the economy. So those economies that are most successful have typically gone on a path of increasing exports as a share of GDP and increasing the diversity of those exports. And that's a marker to say the economy itself, the domestic economy, is developing. It is enhancing its productivity, it's enhancing its diversity. And it's that diversity and productivity that fundamentally creates the wealth and the well-being that really is at the heart of all our conversations for the last while. Now, to achieve that, I think the fundamental starting point, which pretty well all our contributors have discussed this morning, is this idea of trust. Let me pick up what Tendai said and just take it a bit further, which is, I think, when we look at international trade, when we look at people's choice of the use of currency, when we look at the decision to be an informal trader, an informal worker, or part of the formal economy, these are all choices people make relatively freely. And one of the challenges for a government is to say, how do I create the conditions such that people choose to join the system that I'm creating? So from a trading point of view, how do I create the conditions such that people choose to trade with me or invest in my economy? From a currency point of view, how do I create the conditions that people choose to use a local currency as the means of exchange, as Eddie was talking about, and not wanting to hold on to the dollars? The reason people are holding on to dollars is a choice people are making to balance risk. And what you have to think about as a government is, how do I create an environment that has a stable enough currency, a reliable and secure enough fiscal situation, such that people are comfortable and choose to use the local means of exchange rather than dollars, because actually that's easier for them? Or how do I create rules and regulations, whether it be around the way in which I manage the border posts to licenses for business, etc., such that people choose to enter the formal economy because it's in their interest to do so, rather than trade informally with all the risks associated with informal trading. So these markers, these little pieces of evidence about how the economy is running, are very important for what they tell us about the core of the economy. And that, I think, is what really needs to be worked on. And I think, to pick up what Eddie said around the feedback he got from, I think American interlocutors about, Zimbabwe has to come to the party. I think that's really important. Sanctions have played a role, and as Lord Oates and as Thomas said, from a UK perspective, they've been very targeted, less targeted from other places. But broadly speaking, most of the world's economy is available to trade with Zimbabwe. And therefore, the challenge to a huge extent lies within the Zimbabwe ecosystem to address a lot of it. And that means maintaining, as we discussed, the rule of law. That means continuing to establish credibility vis-a-vis the currency, continuing to establish fiscal sustainability, continuing to develop beyond just what Eddie's talked about, the auctions, but get to the point that those auctions are either unnecessary or at much higher volumes. So the currency is A, stable, but B, freely convertible. Because without that convertibility of currency, you're not going to get all the investment that might otherwise flow. But I think then let me turn my attention then to a bit more of the internal mechanics of the economy. Because if you want to have trade, if you want to have foreign investment, we have to think a little bit more around the restrictions on foreign investment and indeed the perceptions of those. I know that the indigenization laws have been evolving, but again, in people's minds, they're a year or two behind. So more work, I think, needs to be done there. But then if you're a foreign trader and you want to engage in value-added activity, engage in commercial contracts, there is a question over the quality of contract enforcement. We've heard the rule of law being touched upon, but I think there's a more practical issue about, as the commercial court is being developed, training, the quality, the number of judges, the ability to actually administer commercial justice and equity in a timely manner is a critical part of ensuring that the outsider, whether that be a non-party member or an international trader, feels that they can get their day in court and that their contracts can be upheld with as much impartiality as anybody else's is. Again, the burden of regulation is another critical area. We need to turn the rhetoric of pro-business into the reality of how it works on the ground. And I think this is where one of the points, we see it quite literally at Bate Bridge with the recent example of where we get to a point where there's greater automation, you suddenly find that there are a lot of other second order issues arising. And I think the point about too many people making money out of chaos is a really important barrier to streamlining and simplifying regulation, because of course it's all those little barriers, all those bureaucratic hurdles that create opportunities for graft, and they need to be quashed, they need to be addressed in a way that makes sure that civil servants and others are adequately remunerated for the job they do, but at the same time we have greatly streamlined processes. And then I'd say from the point of view of international trade itself, and we've heard about ZimTrade's efforts. I think, and Tendai mentioned it as well, the level of openness that Zimbabwe has to the world economy in terms of trade agreements, whether it be SADC, African Free Trade Agreements, or beyond, is actually quite large. And I think collectively, there's a common challenge among African countries to trade with each other. As a region, African countries trade with each other far less than the countries of other regions trade with themselves. So there's definitely an issue. There's also an opportunity to boost that trade, because geographic partners, generally have cheaper transport costs, although of course within Africa that's challenged. But also, if you're at a similar level of technological development, similar level of labor costs, similar level of sort of consumer sophistication, trade is much more of a win-win opportunity between such similar countries than say it is between China and the US, or even Zimbabwe and the US or the UK. And I think that's the real opportunity, that actually the historic classical view, the Ricardian view about the benefits of trade really play out among countries at common levels of development, whereas it tends to be more skewed between developed and developing nations. So that's a real prize that has to be sought after. But I'd say also, if you want to get trade, if you want to get value added for agriculture, and you need to bring capital in, you need to have an opportunity for some easier imports such that you can create that value added system. And one of the things that's notable is that in the in the economic, especially economic zones, there are reliefs on tariffs for raw materials and intermediate products. Those reliefs should be extended as far as possible throughout the country, so that the opportunity to add value, the opportunity to bring capital equipment in, the opportunity to combine products from different countries to create something of high value for Zimbabwe to export is there, and it's not restricted just to special places. I think one of the challenges I see in a lot of African countries is that the government tends to send up a system whereby if you follow a particular set of rules, cozy up, do deals, you can manage to get a system set up. But the ordinary trader who wants to just use the rule of law, use the commercial code, use the trade arrangements naturally to trade, finds it very difficult. Therefore, you're always forced to cut deals with the government. The government should be aiming to be in a position whereby a lot of this trade can happen without it say-so, without it having to get involved, because the ecosystem is enabling. And I think that's a critical mindset shift that would be really beneficial for Zimbabwe and indeed a lot of other countries on the continent, to create that self-sustaining ecosystem that can work without necessarily always having to cut deals with the government, because that also is how we'll start to sort of address the issue of too many people having a vested interest in chaos and in being part of that machine. And I think that's going to really be the key to enabling a flowering of the economy and increasing trade. Thanks, Belinda.
Thank you so much, Stephen. So I was taking notes, so I got kind of carried away. Thank you so much. And I love the perspective that you've given, just talking about how to kind of minimize that chaos and just to remove that kind of blanket of chaos and to build trust and get more people, kind of trusting in the system and being able to make day-to-day decisions about their businesses without needing to bribe somebody or pay somebody. And that's really key. I think there's some comments that have come in. We kind of speak into all the discussions that have happened so far. This is for you, Stephen. This is from Tongesai. Tongesai Ropunga is saying this is brilliant. And this is how to effectively govern and set policies 101. So he's just saying, well done. Your presentation was really great and he appreciates it. Moses Machipisa is saying trust building should be inclusive. Every Zimbabwean should be involved. Outside sanctions must be dealt with. Inside, we need to deal with polarization and corruption. And again, that speaks into what you've just talked about, Stephen, as well. And then Martin Mawai is saying we need to decisively deal with our toxic politics and corruption. Also, not to turn a blind eye on human rights violations when we're talking about targeted sanctions. Let's put these issues into one basket and deal with them. Let's return to constitutionalism so that we can gain trust and confidence from the international community. And these are key fundamentals that we need to take care of. And then I'll just add to what Martin is saying, not just gaining trust from the international community, but I think as Zimbabweans, we've started, we don't trust each other as much as we used to. And so that trust is not just for people outside looking in, but I think as a collective, as a community, if we're going to attain Vision 2030, we need to be able to trust each other and to build together. And then Nigel Chanakira, Nigel did a presentation last week, on economic policy. He's got a comment here on a moral suasion, predictable policies, trust, confidence, and an unduly high premium on political risk are the key areas that need to be addressed. And when all is said and done, these are all governance issues. And he's saying politics is the anchor of trade and development before our economics can start to make sense. And I'd tend to agree with Nigel. I've asked Nigel very quickly to touch on that trust issue. I know he kind of touched on it last week, but we did have some connectivity issues. Nigel, if you don't mind just showing your video, well, if video is a problem, it's fine. Just unmute your mic and then talk to us about and expand on that concept of trust. What were you thinking around that? And just that, how can we grow in that area of trust as a community, as a collective, and then also as we're working with people from outside our borders?
Okay, thanks, Belinda. I think just quickly, I like what Stephen mentioned, turning our rhetoric into reality. I think in a sense, we kind of don't hear ourselves well. We don't listen to what we're saying. We don't necessarily, I think, project ourselves well. And I think it starts at home. Charity begins at home. We begin to trust ourselves at home with domestic policies that are markedly changed. We had a constitutional reform agenda which still needs to be executed. We asked our people, what do they want? And we gave our leaders what we wanted. And that's still to be executed and completed in terms of reforms. And I think that process must be completed because we know what we want. But then to begin to also change those very things that we wanted in terms of constitutional reform doesn't then, endear much confidence. I always kind of indicate to people, as former chairman of the Zimbabwe Investment Center, I met Zimbabwe Investment Authority. I met a lot of investors in my 4-year tenure. And my big takeaway is that you've got to get our locals to believe what we are saying or what our leaders are saying, begin to live it and benefit from it, testify, of how good Zimbabwe has become. Because we know, I mean, it's public knowledge, we were a bit of a basket case as a nation. But if we are reforming, we must believe in those reforms ourselves, because we are the best custodians of that trust in order to pass it on to any visitors. And normally you don't get a person to invest in Zimbabwe unless they've been here, perhaps as a tourist to begin with. Then they begin to trade with you. And then ultimately they invest and then help you push your exports. So I think in a sense, we've got some way yet to go before we actually get somewhere. And I think it begins first and foremost with the politics. The opposition, if the major opposition party is not talking to the ruling party and vice versa, I think then we kind of are done for, because the nation is split straight down the middle. And so we can't even begin to build. So perhaps let me stop there, and thank you for the opportunity.
So I'm going to throw this back to Eddie, maybe even Nigel, and then also to Dr. Mrisa. A key thing that we've kind of come out with is that, the currency is something that needs to be resolved. Trust issues need to be resolved. I think we've talked about, going back to constitutionalism. But I want to ask a different question. So taking trust and then looking at the business sector. If we were to be working towards building trust tomorrow, what would that look like for you, Eddie? I think this probably would be like closing remarks, and then I'll invite Dr. Mrisa to do the same. Nigel, if you want to weigh in on this, you're free to go for it. But what would that look like, if you're building trust with the business sector, looking at our currency discussion as well? What would you think that would look like?
I think it begins in the same place for all of us. You got to walk the talk. We're very good at expressing, what we want and how we want to do things. I mean, the reaction to the president's speech on the 18th of August, 2018 was universally positive. I know Zimbabweans who came back to Zimbabwe on the strength of that speech. And but we've got to walk the talk. We've got to show people that it's not just rhetoric, that these are things we actually believe in. Again, I come back to Ramaphosa saying to his local government candidates from across the entire country, several thousand candidates yesterday, where there's this code of conduct. They all signed the code of conduct. But we want to see it happen. We want to see the physical evidence that these guys mean it. That when it comes to opportunities for personal enrichment, that these guys will turn it down, that they will do deals straight, that they will look after the public interest. And that is not true. We all know that. And respect for human rights, respect for each other, those are, and it'll take time, because we've had our own rights over our own assets. I mean, my savings of more than 60 years of work have been completely wiped out. You know, my old mutual pension, I think, is about $16 a month. And I contributed more than 1.4 million US dollars to the old mutual in my working life. You know, and you know, how do you build trust when you've done that to people, not just once or twice, but regularly, you know, and frequently? So I think it's a question of walking the talk, and we've all got to play our own role, including the president downwards. And when we talk about, you know, we talk about a lot about anti-corruption, for example. I mean, I almost laughed at those papers which were released the other day, where they go after Tony Blair for not paying $300,000 of stamp duty on the purchase of a property in London. My goodness gracious, I can tell you of corruption here where it's in billions of dollars. And, you know, we just laugh at that kind of, you know, you're dealing with pocket money. But here, you know, nothing happens to these people. Everybody knows it's going on, but nothing happens. And until we actually see things actually happening on the ground, and we see people actually walking the talk, I think confidence will be impossible to re-establish. It's starting to happen, but we've got a long way to go.
All right, that's fine. Thank you so much, Eddie. Great remarks there. Dr. Marisa, what are your thoughts on building trust, you know, reforming our economy, especially looking at, you know, currency, which has come up quite a bit?
Thank you so much, Belinda. I think we, you know, just to build upon maybe what Eddie said, the speech that was given by the president way back then, I think one of the things that he said at the beginning of his tenure was how behind we are as a country. You know, that always a country we're behind, we've been left behind, etc. But I think he was talking about being left behind in terms of infrastructure development. But I sense that Zimbabwe got left behind in terms of how to do business and how to conduct issues. Because I think we're still in a certain 1980s mode when the world has moved on. You know, in the 21st century, there is a huge relationship between issues to do with trust, integrity, etc., not only for governments, but even private sector actors. This you see in the mining companies coming up with a code of conduct, etc., how they actually get businesses, etc. But in Zimbabwe, like Eddie is saying, it's still the wild, wild west. We still have that challenge to say, those who are working with government, we know the kind of sort of, it's not your best performing companies. It's not even the well-known companies. It's just briefcase outfits, etc. So I think if we do not fix that, we'll continue to complain that the world has left us or the world is not engaging with us because we are not changing. So our mindset needs to change. And it's for me, and I'll push this further to say, for me, it's just not government's role alone. Even economic agents in the private sector, there's a lot of things that they have to change. Because unless and until, as a community that Nigel was talking about as president of the Zimbabwe Economic Society, looking after investments, etc., unless the mindset of those doing business changes, that they frown upon corruption, they frown upon underhand dealings, that they can be called upon. We see these scandals with McKinsey in South Africa, Pricewaterhouse, etc. But we're yet to see those issues as scandalous here. And we're actually failing to influence the generation that is coming after us, because the heroes of this country are those who you cannot explain how they got their wealth, which is really worrying. Because if you look at the heroes of 2021, 2020, are youngsters who all of a sudden, they're accumulating these expensive vehicles. They have all this money. We don't know how they made it. And those are the people that the millennials are beginning to celebrate. So we actually have a challenge with the value system that we have, this overnight wealth that we have sort of allowed to become something that is like a permanent feature, and now we accumulate. So I think across society, we really need to deal with the integrity issues that we have. Our character ethic is really questionable. It doesn't help to say we're a Christian nation, given the way in which we conduct our businesses. Would love, for instance, to see one business person saying, oh, I was offered this kind of deal by government, but I turned it down because of A, B, C, and D. But we don't see that. We keep on seeing these briefcase issues, briefcase business coming up. So corruption is a relationship issue. There is the corruptor and the corruptee. So as long as we are just dealing with maybe one end of it without dealing with both aspects of the problem, we are not fixing it. Where one goes, when one cannot oil the hand, somebody else will rise up to do that. So in a nutshell, I think it's a countrywide challenge that we really need to deal with. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Doc. And you've touched on corruption. We've got a comment here from Onalena Selolwane, who says corruption thrives where institutions fail. And that's a key observation right there. I'd like to call upon somebody who wasn't on our regional panel, but works in the area of, transparency. This is Depros Muchena, who's the regional director of the Southern African Region Amnesty International Office. So he works closely with governments and organizations, assessing levels of corruption and looking at the failure or success thereof of institutions with relation to human rights, and then also other just constitutional obligations. Mr. Mchena, I would love to invite you to unmute your mic. If you want to turn on your video, that's fine. But if you could unmute your mic and just speak into the subject that we're discussing now.
Oh, thank you, Belinda, for that ambush. I don't have much to say, but to concur with a lot of what Tendai has just said now in his concluding remarks, but also converging with what Eddie also said. There really is a challenge in Zimbabwe and countries of the region to marry economic governance on the one hand with political governance on the other. We know from studies and lessons that even for countries that get their macroeconomic fundamentals right, they get their pro-poor policies right, we also see that faulty governance tends to nullify the impact. Because unless we deal with questions of integrity, leadership, national cohesion, consolidation, and move these countries to a point where they really genuinely want to compete with others, then we'll forever be remaining behind, looking for little enemies inside our borders when we're not dealing with the larger questions of mindset shift and really decisively tackling the twin evils of corruption and poverty. The second issue is that in doing reforms in order either to re-engage with the rest of the world or to build an effective economy, we must also distinguish between a concept borrowed from sociology of organization called isomorphic mimicry and really doing things right. Isomorphic mimicry is the practice of appearing to be doing something when you are doing absolutely nothing. You create an institution that purportedly is fighting corruption, but you remove the teeth of the institution so that it is absolutely ineffective. You create an institution to promote trade or to promote national cohesion and other things like that. But inside the program, there is nothing. So I think for Zimbabwe, it's really, really important to audit the effectiveness and purpose and mindset and effectiveness of our institutions that are driving economic policy, integration of people, that are building financial inclusion, institutions that are doing re-engagement. Because if we don't recheck the purpose of these institutions, then the whole country will be moving in a direction of isomorphic mimicry, the appearance of doing something when we're doing nothing. So I really underscore the point of rebuilding and investing in trust, the confidence building measures needed to really build people so that they own the national processes of re-engagement. And the data that has been shared on trade that is taking place between countries and between Zimbabwe and other countries, I think we must really examine this, because in conversations we talk about, we don't want to use facts. We want to use sweeping statements. and sweeping statements becomes new truth, the whole country is under sanctions, then we just talk about that. Colleagues who have come in and talk to us about figures of trade, we need to interrogate that so that we can start to have much more evidence-based advocacy, and then we give this country a fighting chance to renew itself. Thank you, Belinda.
Thank you so much. I love that analysis. And I'm sorry for the ambush, but these were, you gave a really good analysis. So I think it was worth the ambush. But I would love to just get closing remarks now. Before I do that, I will go to a comment from Elliot Mandaza, who says, to echo what Dr. Marisa Tendai had shared, he says, if you show me the heroes, this is a quote that he's put up there, if you show me the heroes that the youth of your country are looking up to, I will tell you the future of your country. And that kind of sort of grounds us to think twice about what we are allowing to pass, not just in the institutions that govern us, but then also in our interactions with each other as business people. So that's quite critical there. Moses Machipisa is saying these are very critical points that have been raised, and the future is looking bleak if the challenges are not addressed. This generation of youth, our generation, is increasingly getting desperate and angry, and we are excluded and feel the brunt of a dysfunctional economy with limited opportunities. He says it will not end well. I have a different view. I'm thinking engagement, forums, platforms such as this one are part of the process of us moving forward. So I've heard from Eddie. I would like to kind of get comments from Tatenda, from Tom, if he's still on. Just your closing remarks. Stephen, if you want to weigh in just 1 minute, just closing remarks on today's topic.
Thank you, Belinda. I think I've learned a lot from this session, actually. And maybe just to pick from some of the things that were actually highlighted, like what Dr. Marisa said earlier about the Afrocentric approach, that we should focus on what we have here as Africans and build on that. So I think that's also just an approach that we should take, especially if we intend on going towards the Vision 2030. And also the key aspects highlighted by Stephen as well about the trust and the reputation that we need to build on, even by Nigel Chanakiri as well. I think those are very key things. But I think parting from the ZimTrade perspective, we are engaging to try and increase the trade relations in as many countries as possible. And we are starting off with the SADC region and Africa at large as well. So if there anybody would need any assistance, especially for their products to go to other countries, we are here to assist. And yeah, I think that is all I have to say for now. But I look forward, Belinda, please do invite us in the following dialogues as well. These are very insightful for me as well. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. I'll take closing remarks from Tom, if you are able to unmute very quickly, then we can get something from you.
Thank you, Belinda. There's an illuminating call. We learned a lot, and I think one of the things I think is helpful to reflect on when looking at trade and investment is to remember that Zimbabwe isn't working in a vacuum. Every country across the region, across the world, is looking to increase their exports, increase their trading relationships, and businesses and investors will look at these destinations very dispassionately. So it is incumbent on Zimbabwe to make the necessary changes to attract this investment, which can unlock so much growth in the country. And then I think worth signing off on is, we as the UK are very committed, and we remain very committed to working with Zimbabwe to help drive through these reforms, to help create a more prosperous, peaceful, and democratic country with increased trade and investment with the UK. And you know, I think, as you said, Belinda, more dialogues like this and more engagement will only help that. Thank you.
Brilliant. Stephen, anything, last word from you?
Sure, thanks, Belinda. I mean, I'd like to come back to I think what Tendai said a minute ago, maybe phrase it slightly differently, but just to reinforce it. You know, it's the software rather than the hardware that matters. So Tendai was talking about how perhaps Zimbabwe has not moved with the times in terms of thinking a lot still about infrastructure, a lot of focus on tangible issues, perhaps even again a focus on legislation as a piece of paper, whereas in fact behavior is the critical thing that we all need to be talking about. I don't mean it in a moralizing way, but simply how we all interact with each other in the business world, in the political world. And that's where I absolutely concur with the commentators who've been talking about politics. I think politics has to come first in this solution. And I think, you know, the speech in 2018 was a shame, a bit of a lost opportunity, because, you know, a new personality is a fantastic way of resetting expectations and helping to shift perceptions. And I think the fact that over the last 3 years that hasn't quite been followed up as much as it could be is a bit of a lost opportunity. But I'd say keep at it and keep the pressure on to change so that we are walking the talk, and that will make the big difference, I think.
Okay, thank you so much, Stephen, for that. I'm just going to invite last words from Eddie, if you want to say something again from you, or I know you know you've got lots of data, so just 1 minute, please.
It's too soon to jump off the bridge. This is a fantastic country. And I think we should not end on a pessimistic note. We've made huge progress in the last 3 years. And I think so long as we stick to our agenda, so long as we work together and we are able to start trusting each other for doing the right things, and it all comes down to leadership. And so long as we can do those things, I think the future is at our feet.
I would agree. I would say the future is at our feet. I hope I've taken last words from our panelists. But before we kind of come to a close, I would have wanted Dr. Mrisa to give literally like a 2-minute closing remark. Before I do that, I want to do another, call up somebody else who initially wasn't on the program, but I've noted is present in the Zoom room, and I would want to get your insights. So this is Tatenda Machirori. She is no stranger to everybody who's a Zimbabwean. I'm sure you are aware of the huge amounts of work that she does in the area of philanthropy, in the area of education, across the continent, in different parts of the world. I just want to get your comments, just to weigh in on the discussion today. You know, we're talking about stable economy, trade relations, and re-engagement with the world. You are involved heavily in the area of business, but then you're also involved heavily in the area of philanthropy. And that's kind of a place for citizen engagement, but then also for enterprise to tie in. A lot of the discussions that have been happening today are focused around how to improve the economy and make it easy for business to succeed. But I want to find out from you, what would you say are your high-level thoughts on the topic that we've discussed? You know, I'm giving you an open book here. 3 minutes, if you could just give us your thoughts.
Sure. Thank you so much, Belinda. You've done an exceptional job in the last number of webinars where you have facilitated, moderated, coordinated. And I have to say, you've kept us hooked onto the webinars, fascinated and also inspired. Today's discussion on trade and took us right back to the common problems we all know that the nation faces on not just on the economic front, but political front as well. But I want to make my comments as a believer and to say we have a real opportunity as the church, as Christians, to say one area where we can mobilize people, where we can build confidence, where we can build trust is on Sunday. If we begin to speak our aspirations, begin to speak vision, begin to build trust at a very small level, community level, I think we have the opportunity to drive the process of real change and positive change in our country. We take a lot of comfort and strength from amazing leaders throughout the world who have used their pulpits, who have used the church platform to reconcile in a peaceful manner, but addressing hard-hitting issues. And also, many people look to church leaders as the voice of conscience and morality and justice and fairness. And I think the church needs to step up and take that role. Civic society is also very important and has borne the brunt, I think, of discussing some of the issues that are very difficult. But the problem we face with civil society, sometimes it's not necessarily local civil voice that is driving the discussions and the agenda. So I think if we have local voices coming out of the church, tackling these issues and making them part and parcel of our Sunday service, Sunday sermons, I think we can begin to see a paradigm shift in the manner in which we see ourselves and our nation. Then lastly, I just want to say, it's important, I think, to not just to listen, but to go out there as entrepreneurs, as community leaders, as business people, to begin to build those important conversations and networks. I despair many times when I travel, living in the diaspora. There are no programs where we are meeting to talk, how we can do business together, how we can rebuild our country. It's almost like people have lost hope, and the momentum that we saw in 1917, 1918 is virtually lost. So my hope and my prayer is that if each one of us on this platform begin to build that momentum, to begin to find where the conversations can take place, where the rebuilding of relationships can take place, we will definitely see, we will bear the fruit of conversations such as the ones that have been initiated by Civio Institute. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that insight and really highlighting the role of the church as well. We need to do more, definitely, as a church. And just going back, one of the earlier presentations that we had in the first dialogue was Bishop Mpagata talking about the different roles the church can play. So I think definitely that's something that we should put into practice. So it's been a great morning. We've had a lot from different people. I had asked Nigel if he wanted to say anything. I'm not sure if he's keen. Nigel, just calling you out once more, if you have any closing remarks that you want to throw in.
Linda, what can I say? I don't want to spoil the party. Just to state explicitly that Zimbabwe is too rich to be poor. And I know, and I am fully persuaded that within my own lifetime, I will see the best possible Zimbabwe that we can have. And it starts with you and me. So let's do it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Nigel. Now I will invite the real closing remarks. Dr. Marisa, I'll give you 3 minutes. Could you just frame all of the things that we've discussed today? And also just to talk about our next dialogue, which is going to be on social policy. You can kind of give an introduction on that. Dr. Marisa, I'll hand over to you for closing remarks.
In many instances, we take for granted the assignment of hosting dialogues. But I must say, and start off by just thanking my colleague Belinda for a brilliant job that she has done. But also, it's humbling to see people that I grew up as my heroes coming and supporting this. We grew up looking up to Mkoma Nigel. Eddie Cross has always been a towering figure. And just having Mrs. Masiwa come even for those 3 minutes, it's really humbling for the work that we're doing. So we are glad that we have the support. We're not doing this alone. When we started on this journey, we faced some challenges given the politics of our country, but we're glad that even the objective of the dialogue is beginning to be viewed differently. We're getting a lot of inquiries from media players, etc., about these dialogues. So we're excited that we are instigating something. I said, I remember when I was joking around with Stephen in one of our meetings as we were planning, we said, what does success look like? I said, for us, success will look like this. If we see an increasing number of Zimbabweans and even outsiders talking about Vision 2030 in Zimbabwe, for us, that will be success. Just see more platforms that are geared towards talking about what will Zimbabwe look like by the year 2030. That was number one. And number two, when we begin to try to make an input into the existing document, and this is what we did today. And I think the issues that came up here are very important. And like I said at the beginning, we're going to write up a policy brief based on this discussion that will push, especially the issues that were raised to do with trust, confidence building, consistency, and making sure that we have effective institutions. So we're so grateful for every presenter who came and spoke, and for those that we ambushed. So sorry, but for those we ambushed, and we're so grateful that you came in and you made an effort. Honestly, it's a collective job. Civio cannot do it alone. We do it with partnerships, we do it with friends, we do it through solidarity. And we're so grateful for the friends that have come to make it a reality. Then finally, as we go forward, I think the next conversation in 2 weeks' time, please make a date to be with us. We're going to be unpacking social policy. If there's an area that we feel that we have actually gone backwards in a significant way, despite all the positive things to do with trade, development, and infrastructure, is our delivery on social policy. Health delivery is probably at its weakest. Education has been affected thanks to COVID and also already existing challenges that were in that space. Food security is a bit of a stretch, especially for urban households. Urban transport, you know, the issues to do with ZUPCO and the monopoly therein. We'll be unpacking this and more. But for us, it's just not unpacking the problem, but looking at solutions. What can be done? What can be done differently? Because many countries in Africa are facing this challenge that they're experiencing GDP growth, but they are failing to adequately respond to the challenges of social policy, especially for those who are living at the bottom of the pyramid. How do we effectively deliver a social policy that works for all? So that will be the next dialogue that we'll have. And we're excited that the numbers keep on growing. It's in pursuit of saying every Zimbabwean has got a role to play. So it's not just about saying, oh, we want government here and we can just throw our grievances at government, but we're beginning to say, what, as citizens coming from different formations, what could we do differently? How can we contribute to making sure Vision 2030 is achievable? I'm excited about the optimism that Nigel, Tsitsi, and Belinda sort of share to say, even Eddie, about that this is just not, it's too early to let go. It's too early to give up. We have no, I always say to people, I have only but one country, so I can't give up on Zimbabwe. We can't give up on our country. All of us are owners of this country. Others are just privileged to be in our elected offices, but we all have a part to play. So we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time where we're discussing social policy. Thank you so much again for making the time. Spending 2 hours with us is not a joke, but we're so grateful that you could make it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dr. Marisa. And that will mark the end of today's dialogue. It's been explosive. We've had some great discussions and a lot of nuanced understanding of our relationships. I think we kind of tried to tie in and get good perspective on our relationship with the UK. ZimTrade came in and talked to us about our relationship with Africa and the rest of the region. So thank you so much to everybody who presented. In absentia, thank you so much to Lord Olds. We will send him a message after this for your contribution to this dialogue. To everybody who is watching us on Facebook, so on Civio Institute, on Heart and Soul, or on Newsday Zimbabwe, thank you so much for attending. If you're in the Zoom room, well done and thank you. Like Dr. Marisa said, this was Stable Economy, Trade Relations and Re-engagement with the World. This is the third dialogue that we're hosting out of 6. Next 2 weeks from now, we're going to be talking about social policy and how to create inclusive social policy frameworks that will be able to take care of the needs of the broader population as we are working to achieve Vision 2030. So thank you so much, everybody. We're going to call it a day here. You can obviously watch this again on Facebook, on the pages that I've mentioned, and do register for the next one. We will be able to share with you the details for that using your email addresses. But thank you very much and have a good day.